Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Happy New Year. Although I still haven't put up any 2020 wrap ups or made any formal 2021 plans yet, today I just want to talk about what I've been reading and thinking about since the new year began. Coming soon, I promise to address at least a bit of the rest. The first book I completed was an annual reread, 84 Charing Cross Road. Last year, as 2019 was about to become 2020, I saw that Sarah on Hardcover Hearts was planning to read Helene Hanth's short book of letters to mark New Year's Day. Given that I have long loved that book and read it many times, I decided to follow her plan. It's such a perfect way to celebrate bookish new beginnings that I, along with many other booktubers and Instagrammers and others, joined in the read-along this year, too. This year, my husband and I listened to an audiobook recording of 84 Charing Cross Road, available through our public library, and read by a group of different narrators who all each read the letters of a specific character. It was a lovely experience and a nice change of pace, but to be honest, I prefer reading the text. I also really love the film version, which David and I watched fairly recently. Since I've talked about Hanth's book a few times on this channel, I won't go into more detail, but suffice it to say that the book is charming, inspiring, and heartbreaking, and you get to feel all of that in just an hour or so of reading. If you've never picked it up, or if you haven't read it recently, I definitely recommend it. The second book I finished in 2021 was Eudora Welty's One Writer's Beginnings, also a slim little volume that's utterly charming and insightful. The book contains 3 essays, which she initially presented as a series of 3 lectures at Harvard in the spring of 1983, and which were then published by Harvard University Press. After it was published, my mother and father, both huge Welty lovers, instantly ordered a volume. As soon as they received it, it started passing from hand to hand. I was third in line, back when I was still in high school. I've read it a couple of times more recently, but it was definitely time for a reread. In 2020, Scribner published this beautiful new edition, which includes a short introduction by the phenomenal poet Natasha Trethewey, who grew up in the same place Eudora Welty did. The introduction is very small, but like Welty's book, it is layered and meaningful in a way that doesn't call attention to itself. As I was thinking about what I wanted to say about the book during this video, I glanced back to the introduction and saw all sorts of confluences with the text that follows, links I did not recognize when I first read Trethewey's words. Much of the book is filled with stories about Welty's childhood and her family. I'll read one of the opening paragraphs to you to give you a feel of her warm style. When I was young enough to still spend a long time buttoning my shoes in the morning, I'd listen toward the hall. Daddy upstairs was shaving in the bathroom, and Mother downstairs was frying the bacon. They would begin whistling back and forth to each other up and down the stairwell. My father would whistle his phrase. My mother would try to whistle, then hum hers back. It was their duet. I drew my button-hook in and out and listened to it. I knew it was The Merry Widow. The difference was their song almost floated with laughter. How different from the record, which growled from the beginning, as if the Victrola were only slowly being wound up. They kept it running between them, up and down the stairs, where I was now just about ready to run clattering down and show them my shoes. Although Welty sometimes includes a sentence or two explaining how this kind of anecdote reflects how she sees the world and how she writes, often the author just lets them stand, and with each new accretion of story, the reader starts to see the deeper resonances of Welty's anecdotes begin to emerge. As the year starts and I've been thinking about what my reading goals are for 2021, I've been contemplating how I can read more. I might talk about that more broadly in an upcoming video, but of course, one of the big ways to read more is to read faster. Depending on what I'm reading, I sometimes do read quite fast, but there are many times when I get lost in the voices of the characters or in the slow rhythm that settings sometimes provide, or even just beautiful narration. Welty addresses this herself in a way more consciously symbolic, I think. Ever since I was first read to, then started reading to myself, there has never been a line read that I didn't hear. As my eyes followed the sentence, a voice was saying it silently to me. It isn't my mother's voice, or the voice of any person I can identify, certainly not my own. It is human, but inward, and it is inwardly that I listen to it. It is to me the voice of the story, of the poem itself. The cadence, whatever it is that asks you to believe, the feeling that resides in the printed word, reaches me through the reader voice. I love that, and it rings true to me. Hearing that voice of the story might slow us down, but it pulls us in, too. So yes, both books I've finished so far this year, the short books of Eudora Welty and of Helene Hanff, are perfect reminders of the power of reading in our lives. I have 2 additional books about reading that I'm almost finished with, newly published books, and I will try to talk about them perhaps next week. Another readerly tradition. Every Sunday morning, my family sits down to look through the New York Times. We only get the print edition on Sundays, but if we get up early enough, we try to make a morning of it. The goal is always to make a nice breakfast or brunch, perhaps with sourdough waffles, but honestly, this rarely seems to happen. Our son sometimes makes espresso for us, and he's learning to make latte art on the top of our drinks. Very fancy. And then, usually, David picks up the news sections first, and I look through both the recipes in the at-home section and mostly at the book review. 2 Sundays ago, I think, there was a glorious review of Heather Clark's Red Comet, the huge new biography of Sylvia Plath, which I am slowly working my way through on audiobook. This week, though, there was a not-so-glorious review of the huge new biography of Sylvia Pankhurst. I had been really looking forward to it, but the review, while not cruel, suggests that the author, Rachel Holmes, really doesn't explore relationships between the major figures in the book and doesn't seek to understand Pankhurst's inner life much at all. The reviewer also says this. At more than 900 pages, Holmes' book is packed with detail, but marred by so much repetition that the reader is left with the impression of a vast amount of material not fully marshaled into narrative form. At times, her paragraphs feel like notes, hastily compiled and not fully digested. Moments of high drama are interrupted by digressions that leave the reader grasping to fill it meaning from a barrage of information. The kicker here is that the review is by a writer I respect a great deal, although I've still not read all of her recent book, and that is Francesca Wade, the author of the widely admired Square Haunting, 5 Writers in London Between the Wars. So, my question for all of you is, have any of you read the new Sylvia Pankhurst biography yet? Its huge length and its huge price tag are scaring me off if it can't hold me the way the Sylvia Plath biography is holding me. I'd love to hear your own opinions about this book. The topic is so fascinating and important, I think. Of course, in true New York Times book review style, the next pages can always bring new delights. One of my favorites in this issue is a feature article by the poet Alyssa Gabbert. Her piece is entitled How Poets Use Punctuation as a Superpower and a Secret Weapon. And in it, she looks at 2 or 3 new books of poetry and also refers to some older poets. I love the author's analysis of how various typographical marks can acquire new meanings or lend new meanings to poetry. Gabbard starts by calling our attention to Emily Dickinson and her dashes, which the author explains that in her handwritten poems were actually, quote, more ambiguous, some appearing more like sloppy periods or commas, some lines slanted like slashes, or even vertical, suggesting an idiosyncratic diacritical system. But most of the essay explores more contemporary poetry. When talking about the use of the outline of a circle appearing between fragments in Laura Mimosa Monte's Thresholds, she finds herself wondering, is absence a presence? Is no place a place? After playing with the idea a bit, she gives a great comparison. The circles function like a page in a legal document that is printed with "this page intentionally left blank," which is then no longer blank. In Monte's work, these labels seem to say, don't skip the white space. The gaps between language are part of the language. If you can get your hands on this piece, it's a really interesting essay, and it makes me want to think more seriously about some of the new poetry I've read lately. Several interesting volumes came out in 2020. Do any of you read contemporary poetry? Would you want to hear me ramble on about it, given that I know very little about modern poetry? Let me know down in the comments. Okay, one more bit of reading. Yesterday I started a project that will take me pretty much all year long. Several months ago, I came up with the idea of reading Michael Schmidt's huge biography of the novel over the course of 2021, just a chapter per week, more or less. Very recently, I was thrilled to see Alex at Big Out Books list the volume as one of her favorite reads of 2020. And yesterday morning, I watched Chris at Leaf by Leaf mention that he's putting a little more focus on literary criticism during this year, and he mentioned this book as well. So I sat down with the tome, all set to read, and decided to take a picture for social media. I was thrilled that so many of you were as excited about it as I am. One of my favorite thoughtful readers even agreed to read with me throughout the year, Amy of the channel From the Dusty Bookshelf. Well, I enjoy the introduction. The book traces the history of the novel in more or less chronological order, using other novelists to talk about what each book meant to them and what kinds of connections those authors see between various novels. Since I've been thinking a lot this week about how scholars come to their theses and their arguments, I was especially taken with this quote by the author. For this book, I read in a spirit of committed curiosity, the spirit of essay in the old sense of the term, exploratory, not demonstrating and proving something I already knew. I did have an instinct that the relationships between novels and between writers would illuminate the properties and values of this diverse literary form in which English language writers in different ages and societies have excelled. I really love that perspective of, quote, committed curiosity, and also Schmidt's use of the term essay to refer to his exploration. As a person who thinks primarily as I am writing, not a person who has ideas and then writes them down, but who writes in order to have ideas, Schmidt's arguments here really resonate with me. These first few pages, the prologue and introduction, are just a hint at what's coming, of course, and there isn't a whole lot to say about the book yet, but I did want to mention the actual physical book I've been reading. My copy of the book is a used one, as so many of my books are. Although 1,000 pages are completely clean copy, apparently unread, there was fairly heavy underlining in pencil in the introductory sections. As I read, I erased the underlinings and replaced them with some of my own, noting what the previous reader had underscored and wondering about that person's perspective. Immediately, it became clear that the author was very well read when it came to classic white male authors, but less aware of women and black authors, etc. The reader seemed to be making a list of books to read and authors to explore. I turned the page to a lot more underlining and also some interesting marginalia, not in English but in Chinese. Looking back, I can't believe I didn't take a photograph before I erased it. The idea that a reader would be sitting down with a tome like this in English and about English language literature, but be able to essentially code switch midstream to make commentary in a different language left me with all sorts of questions about how bilingual or multilingual people think. There are a lot of wonderful booktubers for whom English is not their first language or their primary language, who often read books in English and also present on BookTube speaking English. If you're willing to talk about it, I'd love to know if you find yourself more likely to stick to one language when making marginal notes, or if when you're reading in one language you can simultaneously be interacting with the book in another language. I'm not even sure exactly what my question is, but this text made me question my instinct about compartmentalization. But since I can only read one language with any fluency, I have no experience there. Let me know how you do it. Well, that will be it, I think, for today. I've enjoyed a great break recently, and I don't think I've talked about my current reading in quite a while. I have kind of a backlog of books to discuss, but I'll try to get to them very soon. Thanks for joining me today here on Hannah's Books. See you soon.